want her to be able to have.
I'm currently studying the Gospel of John, and with my small group, I did one of Father Michael's practices, which is like you sit with a small section of scripture and you replace whatever is talking about Jesus and you read it out loud to Jesus, like, you did this, you went here. And so when I did that out loud for John 1, and it was like, you were in the beginning and you were the word. And it is exactly what you're talking about, Bishop Ma. It just really changed how in the flesh incarnate Christ was and is. And I'm totally guilty of John chapter 5, that Jesus is telling the Pharisees, like, you search the scriptures because you believe that in them you have life, but you missed it. Like, in me you have life. I'm totally.
And I mean, it helps to know the Greek on this, doesn't it? The logos. Logos translates as word, but logos is much more. It's the whole logical concept and thought behind the words. So it's not just that Jesus is some expression that you have with spoken words. He is, in fact, the truth of what is being expressed. It's a hard word to translate because it's so all encompassing in its concept of meaning, the whole idea and logic and structure behind whatever that word is.
I think another thought that I'm having on why these first two paragraphs might feel upside down or strange, it kind of in a tangential or just different way than Jackie, but more similar to Erica, is that, like, I don't often feel very connected to my food. When we go on our quiet retreats, Michael's like, you're not reading while you're eating, you're not looking at anyone, you're not talking to anyone, you're just there with your food, eating it with God. And then when I come home from the quiet retreat, I do that for like two days. And then I'm back to my normal, okay, I'm going to multitask while I'm eating, or I'll be eating with Dan. But it can very easily become I went to HEB, got something that I didn't grow and didn't work on. And not that that's necessarily like the end goal is to go like be a subsistence farmer. I mean, that would be awesome. But that is, I think, another reason why it could feel like, okay, man is what he eats, but I haven't sat and thought with that, or sat with that thought in the way Erica did about the Eucharist, of being like, wait, this is my primary act of interacting with the world, because I'm going to a big box store and I'm coming back to putting it in my fridge. And there's a line here in the book where he says, like, food in the fridge is dead. And that, like, really, it's like a jarring line. I can't find where it is, but
we'll get there.
We'll get there. Yeah, just kind of a thought of why it's like a new thing to think through. And I have appreciated trying to kind of build the habit of like slowing down when I'm eating, but it has not been happening recently.
Can I piggyback on what Sarah said?
Please.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for sharing that, because there was some thoughts that were sort of on the periphery, and I couldn't quite connect with them until I heard what you said. And I realized that in regard to food, somewhere along the way, I sort of picked up a sense, a sort of a slight negative association with food, where anything other than the bare minimum was considered sort of indulgent and self-serving. And yet I've wrestled with that. It's never really fully sat well with me. And there's a part of me that's thought, God gave us food for enjoyment too, right? Why? Otherwise, we would all just eat something, I don't know, that looked like, I don't know, a lump. of something, right? But instead, he gave us things for every season, different colors, different shapes, beautiful symmetry, beautiful design, amazing flavors, so satisfying. And so then that it's kind of a cool connection to think that of his intent, right? His intent is to satisfy our desires that he created us with. And that would encompass our physical hunger and our spiritual hunger and our sort of interpersonal social hunger, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that and this is as Sarah also, I think, points out, in the context of the way we live, that's very different from the biblical context where, most people were subsistence farmers. They interacted with their food from, the seed on up. And it was their work to get that done. And if it's just a mechanism to keep us alive, like you say, I mean, if we just have a bunch of pills we could gulp instead of eating, and in some ways, a lot of people are getting close to that. That's a contempt for God's creation, and it's meant, as you say, to be enjoyed, as well as nourishing us. And it's meant for us to be the co-creators in that process. So that, for instance, the offering makes a lot more sense in the first century when the bread that you milled and baked and grew, as wheat, and the wine that you picked the grapes and stomped them and put in the yeast and made the wine. When you're bringing that up as the offering to become the Eucharistic gifts, that has a much different connotation than when you get a bottle of wine off the shelf, or even those people that insist on having, quote, sacred wine that they get that's kosher and all that they have to get from a special stock. There's not much involvement and sweat in that, and not much creativity. And it's an art to make wine and bake bread. It's an art to grow grapes and grain. So yeah, very much. And so that's presented by us as part of our vocation as co-creators. And we use money as a substitute in the offering. And in some ways, that's good. Money's a symbol of that work which we do. But, just the bill lying in the plate doesn't do it the same way as when you bring, the bread you made, the wine you made, and offer it to God. It's his gift, he makes the grain to grow and the grapes to grow, but you had a process, you had a part in the process too. So it's a combination of nourishment, enjoyment, celebration. It's meant to be done socially, which is a problem in our society, where everybody, is eating at a different time in front of the TV and just grabbing things. And it's meant to be a meal with God. It's meant to be a shadow of the Eucharist through the week that you're getting. And then you widen that out. I mean, sex. What a bizarre, idea for preserving the species. And You know, all, but again, I mean, that's what God gave us. And with all those same elements of not just reproducing. I mean, he could have made us like amoeba that can, you know, just split and do it. You know, nothing to it. But it has the same elements of sociability. You can't do it by yourself. And the same elements that it's meant to be enjoyed. And it also has the practical goal that's how the human race continues. So in all things, that's just two examples. It's that same gift that cannot be done if material things are simply, you know, stuff that you have to do in order to survive, to be spiritual.
One of the thoughts that I had, Lay, I know one of the thoughts that you had brought to mind is that we often do have these kind of confused relationships with food, in disordered relationships. And then though it also occurred to me that this mindset or understanding it as with man as the hungry one who needs to be fed is kind of like a vulnerable place to be in. Like, you're not the one who's doing the feeding, you're the one who needs to be fed and need to be fed from creation, which is like fed from the hand of God. But I was just thinking about the difference in worldviews of like one that is more like works, like I'm gonna learn these things or do these things or serve these ways, is kind of a church mentality that we've seen in different churches, and this stance is much more vulnerable, and it's like I'm like a baby, like I need to be fed, I need the creation to feed me, and you get to be a participant in that, but at the same time you're like a receiver in overall in this worldview. And so I think that's a big distinction. You get to be a participant, but you are still like receiving from it rather than surviving by your own work or your own merit or whatever.
Yeah, isn't it funny how fast this connects back to grace? We are helpless. We'll always be helpless. We will never be able to create dirt to grow food in. And again, that's so much clearer to an agricultural society. And it's not so clear, at the supermarket, which seems to have this kind of endless, miraculous supply that replenishes itself automatically somehow. But we're helpless. So it's not an accident that the sacraments are about grace, because that's what we have to stay alive, and we can't make it ourselves. We have to accept it, exactly like you say, as helpless infants. And dysfunction, like you mentioned too. I mean, think of the epidemic of spiritual anorexia, where people starve themselves of God's gifts. So yeah, it absolutely links together, which is part of what Shema does to you. Start at any point on the spectrum, and you will connect to all the other points as he goes, because there is a unity in the Christian message that centuries of people have tried to mess up, but it's always there, and once you see it, it's easy to to see how it connects to all the other parts. Just as once, and I thought of this in what you said too, Jackie, about Scripture. Once your eyes are open to the spirit, to the sacramental concept, you see it all through the New Testament. That, for instance, First Corinthians is really a book set entirely in the context of the Eucharistic celebration, and First John's comments on love are in the context of the Eucharist. Revelation starts when John is standing in church at the Eucharist on Sunday on the island of Patmos and sees the doors of heaven open, and his Eucharist, his humble little Eucharist on that little island, is suddenly joined with a huge eternal heavenly celebration that's going on, that they then get to be a part of, and we always are. It's just that, we can't generally see the doors opening.
Any questions or comments on what's been said already? Well, moving along in the section, the next bit, he talks about kind of two answers to the question being what life is both motivation and the beginning and the goal of Christian mission. And he gives the two major schools of thought for answering that question. He gives the religious life and the active life, or the better life. What is your experience with those schools, or your thoughts about that sort of distinction between those two ideas?
Well, in my experience, it leaned toward the religious life, which I think definitely instilled sort of this sense of disconnection with the material world, physical world. The attitude I sort of grew up with was just a little bit underlying of, there's going to be a new world. Yeah, we'll try to take care of it, but it's like there's better things to focus on, was the sort of vibe I got. And so it is definitely stretching at the edges of my sort of, my worldview, I guess. The idea of the world, I just completely lost my train of thought. I just did. Sometimes there's too many and then they just go all at once. Yeah, it's just stretching my view of the world as something, as a reflection of God, as a source of God, as a means of communion with God. That is, I'm looking forward to that process, Erica, of, I feel like I'm at the beginning of considering these concepts. So it's a lot to chew on. I love it.
Well, and you just opened another door, which is our whole relationship with the world, which of course many churches say, no, that's not our problem. We're religious, so we don't worry about the environment or the natural world or anything like that, because that's not our problem. We're just training you for heaven, and there's again a very strong conceptual difference between the biblical view and the Western modern view. The Western and European approach, which is the American approach, is we conquer the world. God has given us dominion, and that means we need to wrestle it down. We conquered the West, right? We did, and we won, and now the West is kind of a mess. We conquered the people, conquered the animals, conquered the land, and then the land started to blow away, and the people are having problems, and so on. The biblical concept of dominion is not that you get to conquer and rule like an oppressive tyrant, and make much of it. Dominion means you're responsible to God for running it right. Our species is different from all other species in that I think there's other species smarter than we are. I know some beagles down the street that know a whole lot more about this neighborhood than I do. But what our unique capacity is that we have the ability to organize and to run things on a major scale. And that's what God has sent us here to do. That's our role on the planet. And our job is to nurture the earth and its creatures, not flatten it and them and each other. And so, because God is the God of the physical world as well as the spiritual, that means our worldview has to take in that to account, that we are also concerned about God's environment and not messing up God's property and not destroying God's creatures beyond redemption.
One of the regarding dominion that I often like to recall is, we do translate dominion really oddly when it comes to us having dominion over all of the creation, because the reality is that Jesus is Lord, right? And he has dominion over each of us. And would we want him to treat us like we treat the creation? And most of us would answer, no, not at all. I would want him to care for me and, work for my betterment. And so dominion can mean different things depending on how we're applying the word. And when we apply it, I think we should apply it in Genesis 1 the same way that we apply it to Jesus's dominion over all things.
I think the dichotomy, that's the right word, in the situation where he's talking about like mysticism in religious life and then activism and those two different pulls. So, like I think I've seen that played out in my life when you're looking for my own self, when especially when I was younger, and then in other people, like if you're looking for meaning in life and you don't know where to find it, how to understand it, these two things are easy pulls, and I think there's like good in both of them, but I think I'm just going to stick with my previous idea and kind of play it out here, is that instead of participating in activism or religious life as like a recipient of God's grace, we take it one step farther and we're like activism for the sake of activism or religion for the sake of religion, which is kind of what he gets at. But I guess I'm just gonna agree with him that I've seen that played out both in my own life and like at different times wondered like, should I have more activism or should there be something I really care about, or just like searching for meaning in my own life, and then have seen that in other people as well. I feel like those two directions are pretty true to what I've seen for people who are looking for like value and meaning in life. Some people just ignore both all of that, but I agree with him.
When you read about these two, compartments of life, if you will, the religious life versus the active life or the better life, when you were reading it for the first time, did you scratch your head wondering, oh, what else is there? What was your experience of reading through that for the first time when he kind of, well, because it's clear that he's going to come up with something else.
I think for me, I remember a distinct period in college where I was like, I feel like I should care about something and like be involved in it and like want to change the world. There's people doing protests or whatever. And I was in a church at the time, and it like I remember reflecting on this thinking like, why didn't it occur to me that like my religious life could have been what I was caring about, but like I didn't know how to do a protest for that or like have a flyer or whatever. So I think I knew that there was something missing in both of those. I think I was able to recognize that on my own. That revealed itself. I don't know if I would have known, maybe I don't remember how I interacted with this book initially, but maybe it helped me understand what that missing thing was and like bring it into right view. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is in the third little subsection of this first paragraph.
Like,
and he says the natural dependence of man upon the world was intended to be transformed constantly into communion with God, in him whom is all life. Man was to be the priest of a Eucharist, offering the world to God, and in this offering he was to receive the gift of life. But in the fallen world, man does not have the priestly power to do this. His dependence on the world becomes a closed circuit, and his love deviated from its true direction. He still loves, he's still hungry. He knows he is dependent on that which is beyond him, but his love and his dependence refer only to the world in itself. He does not know that breathing can be communion with God. He does not realize that to eat can be to receive life from God in more than the physical sense. He forgets that the world, its air, its food cannot by themselves bring life, and so on, which is exactly what you're saying. It just, as he says, becomes closed circuit. So yeah, you're active because you have the need, and you see, obviously you see problems that need solving. So you get active. But if, just like environmentalists see a world in trouble, but they don't see that the solution is in the context of God. They simply think somehow through this closed circuit that people can make themselves better and fix things. And so they really fail to communicate the basic message that we're put here to nurture the earth. Because they're not plugged in beyond that closed circuit.
For me, I really related to like falling into this religious life. And he says, the result is the same. The religious life makes the secular one a life of eating and drinking, irrelevant, deprives it of any real meaning save that of being an exercise in piety and patience. And the more spiritual is like the real religious banquet. And I definitely was in that camp, and so much of it just like sucks the joy out of life. So for me, that shift really started happening in motherhood. So I was like practicing medicine at an uninsured clinic, which I hated every day. But I was like, this is the holiest thing to do. Like it could not compute in my mind that I could practice medicine in a field of medicine that I enjoyed, because I was like, no, this is the religious thing to do. And then when I became a mother and stayed at home, I was like, I'm no longer serving God because I'm not serving the poor anymore. And to me, like rocking a baby and feeding a baby and wiping butts, I was like, this isn't holy. Like, this isn't serving God. And so when I became a mother, I really wrestled with this concept of like, what is sacred and what is secular? And even still, I still obviously wrestle with that concept of, I mean, you have a book, Bishop Mott, like everything is sacred. And to me, this concept, like you said, once your eyes are kind of open to a sacramental life, like that is how I read the Bible now. I'm like, oh wow, this is all over the place. But also in the Bible, seeing that like everything is sacred, everything has been redeemed by the cross, and it is a completely different shift for me of enjoying anything in the world because it's sacred, because it's redeemed.
Yeah, it's interesting that so many churches have gotten rid of the crucifix, because it's ugly. I can't think of a physically uglier scene than all that blood and gore and so on. Much worse than wiping baby butts. And yet it's, if there's a hierarchy of sacredness, it's the most sacred thing that ever happened. It's so completely immersed in the physical realities of the event, that in such a way that that it's hard for humans to even think about it, and therefore it's easier just to have a nice shiny cross and skip all that messy stuff. So yeah, what you figured out was you have a sacred vocation in that baby that includes the the physical parts. That's every bit as good as practicing medicine, and that's a hard concept for people to get. And yes, you're right. If there's one about what you say about joy, if there's one, and Father Alexander comments on that too, that the worst accusation, I forget who he's quoting that said it, but some atheist, Nietzsche, yeah, atheist philosopher, said the most devastating criticism of Christianity was Nietzsche when he said Christians have lost their joy. And if there's one thing traditional Catholicism and strict Protestantism have in common, it's that if you're not suffering, you're not really doing the right thing. If you're having fun, something's seriously wrong. You must not really be Christian.
That's
And
why I worked in a job I hated for 3 years.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
of that exact thing.
yeah, you will get lots of time off in purgatory for that. Only the catch is purgatory doesn't exist, so you wasted your time.
Any other final thoughts on this section? I think the last sentence of it really strikes me when he says, whether we spiritualize our life or secularize our religion, whether we invite men to a spiritual banquet or simply join them at the secular one, the real life of the world for which we are told God gave his only begotten Son remains hopelessly beyond our religious grasp. And that's kind of the introduction that I think is so for us to recognize that so much of the way that we have expressed the gospel, the kingdom of God, the lordship of Jesus, most of the world, and I have lots of friends and family, and probably each of you do as well, that have rejected the Christian faith, is because we fail to answer this question. We fail to answer the question, like, why does it even matter? And this last bit, for the real life of the world for which we are told God gave his only begotten Son remains hopelessly beyond our grasp. And the answers of the religious life, the answers of the active life, both don't answer that, don't respond fully to that question. And I'm sure you have friends as well that have walked away from the faith because both either the religious life or the active life fail to respond to the ultimate questions of, like, why would God give his Son for that? So hopefully we'll find that answer out starting next week.
And our friends and family that have jumped the ship. Good question whether they rejected Christianity or rejected what they thought was Christianity, which was what was presented to them, but it might not have been the real thing, and that's doubly sad. And so I want to ask the question next time, about why. Can you explain why I'm not religious?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not. I don't know if you are, but I'll be interested to hear next time.
Well, we will conclude with that. It is 4:30, and we'll be hanging out here if anybody wants to hang out and ask other questions. But thank you for your time today, ladies, and I'm going to stop the recording.